Student movement, you have read about the student movement in Quebec, really realized important gains in several aspects, but one of the main importance in my view was the fact that its combativeness brought into the streets and into combat or social fight against the power other sectors that were, for a long time, that were relatively neutralized, passive in their attitude toward the government. Unfortunately, well, we had to fight against corruption in Quebec, but the corruption scandal draw so much attention of the opposition forces, including Québec Solidaire, that in the past years the movement, the social movement, was a little bit passive, and the student movement enabled them to coalesce around the student demands, which became a popular fight, not only a student strike. But in the same time, at the end of the summer, the more collaborative sectors of the student movement were successful in conveying the idea that the minimal platform on which all the student movement were united and made their force and their capacity to mobilize, which was the freeze on the tuition fees, was guaranteed by the election of PQ. And unfortunately, this political maneuver was relatively successful even within the social movements and the more combative sectors of society, which laid into that promise. And one have to understand the electoral mode as you know it is so tricky against change, that because of 9 years of liberal government, many years of blatant corruption, really people wanted to get rid of the liberal government. So these factors played for reliance on the movement, on big parts of the popular base of the movement, on the PQ, to realize the freeze of tuitions. And of course, as you know, what happened is that PQ co-opted one of the leaders, offered him a seat, in fact, in the National Assembly, the one from the college, FEC, Bureau Blouin. And then I have to admit that the most combative part of the student movement, la classe, la coalition of the more radical part of the movement, that same element that made their force and their capacity to support and resist to the intimidation of the government when its spokesperson went to deal with the government, with the liberal government, which was to say, as a leader, I cannot decide anything beyond what was decided by my base. If you have anything more to offer, I have to go back to my general assemblies. And this coming and going was a tremendous capacity for the student movement to to avoid what happened in the past, that leaders of the student movement, talking in the name of student movement, went into closed negotiation doors, were forcing the more radical part into isolation and obtaining some little gains and coming back to announce renouncement to some the main demands of the movement. So this time, the spokesperson of the class that Gabriel Nadeau-Dubois, was quite able to withstand the pressure, because the class had done a tremendous job of mobilization on a basis of 6 months. 6 months before the beginning of the strikes, there was a very, very great push for mobilization. But that same mechanics of decisions, completely horizontal decisions, in the context of a post-electoral period corresponding to the necessity to complete the last session, so a condensed period of study with a large burden of study, made it very difficult for ASE to organize itself, to maintain the level of mobilization, to be able in the General Assemblies to come out strong enough to oppose the, if you wish, la collaboration, la capitulation. It's a bit hard to say, but let's say it for the sake of our discussion. The kind of capitulation of the FEC, one of the branches, and then we had the summit, and all was set with corporate media to force the two other organizations to accept the decisions of the summit, and by push and pull of the minister, one day saying, okay, we'll discuss about free tuition, free education, free university, one day saying, no, it's not on the agenda of the forum. In fact, they caught them by surprise, because if they knew from the beginning, for example, that there is no place for their demand, which is a freeze, in order to discuss about free tuition, free university, they could have mobilized around that. But because it was entertained that maybe there is room for that discussion, unfortunately, the ASE couldn't mobilize sufficiently. But all is not lost. Politically, we can say globally, the student movement has won a lot in long term. Just to give you an example, the student movement of 2005, which was really nothing in comparison with the 2012 in Quebec, gave to Québec Solidaire, in fact, the majority of its intermediate cadre, the best of our organizers, the best of those who produce new ideas, who produce our intellectual production within our ranks, are people from the student movement of 2005. If we have grown from 8,000 to 40,000 just in a matter of 8 months in 2012, it's a little indication of the great promises and the great possibilities of the level of politicization, the level of conscience gained through that struggle by thousands of students, which otherwise weren't in a context where they even knew about the existence of alternatives or of possibilities of free university, of an alternative left in Quebec, so on and so forth. So we have to look into the student movement not in the immediate gains now, which are limited, but in the long-term impact on the social movement and on the organized political left. And in that regard, I hope it will be very positive. I accept the fact that ethnic chauvinism could be terrible against the interests of workers. And the dominant class has used it here and elsewhere in Lent and in multiple examples. And in Canada, anti-Quebec chauvinism is unfortunately very disturbing and very high, much more than anti-Anglo chauvinism used to be now. Maybe it used to be before, but I don't see it. I don't see anything at the same level. But in the same time, well, of course, one can say that in Québec Solidaire there are a lot of petits bourgeois. We have to accept where we are and where we stand for. I'm not a worker, but I think there is a genuine tentative to build an alternative without being certain if it's the best or the only way, and it partly answers to your question. Of course, I think it's completely legitimate to question the opportunity to use electoral mode to change society. Fortunately, a lot of people try to change it in many ways which are not electoral. We have social struggle everywhere at different level in hopefully all societies. And in my opinion, there will never be a real political change through institutions like the parliament or formal democracies if there is not a strong popular movement behind, a side, within. But that being said, what is the problem for some of us to devote part of our time to occupy a place that we don't want to be used only by the adversaries of the society? Of course, there is a leap of faith in doing that, which goes to our experience of each other. Those who have come together in Quebec come from social movements where they have come to know each other through struggle. You know, for example, the Courant, the current, which I represent, have collaborated and worked with the feminist movement for at least 10 years before the creation of Québec Solidaire. The feminist movement and some union movement have worked with the community groups on many other issues for at least 15 to 20 years. So these are people who have gained some experience in social fight and have decided not to abandon the social fight, to ensure its relay and its relève? No, la relève.
The next wave.
The next wave. Those who ensure the next wave in the social movement, but also to give to the social movement some form of political representation, some leverage to put some cracks in the system. Now, will we be successful? Est-ce qu'on va être? Will we be really able to do what we pretend that we're going to do, which is to fight capitalism? The future will show. But I understand that from a Trotskyist perspective, or from just the perspective of a lot of us, of people that don't know us in practice, in the fight, in the combats we have carried, that there is not that much hope, there is not that much chance that we can succeed. But since I'm an optimist, since I don't see many other choices, since I see considerable gains for society, for communities, for minorities, for workers, for aboriginals in Latin America, by the relative political gains obtained by political left in Latin America, I think it worth trying. It won't be sufficient. There are other fights to come within and after, but we have to do that also. But that doesn't, ça n'empêche pas, that doesn't prevent other groups and other currents, other left-wing proposals to find their place. I don't think we have to fight each other. We have to complement each other, and that's also my approach to anarchists who are in many ways allies of us in many combats that we have undertaken for refugees, for against war, for housing and many other issues. In our principles of foundation, Québec Solidaire has recognized all the rights of the Aboriginal people, including the right for total self-determination. And we consider them as nations to whom we have to deal on an equal basis. We are many nations in Quebec. That means the Quebec nation with 11 other nations that partage, that share a territory, and it just needs a minimum of decency and historical decency of what we have done to them to really improve the relationship between natives and the institutions of the Europeans that have occupied the place since 400 years. In Quebec, we are known, Québec Solidaire has very close to the Edelmore movement, as we were close to the anti-globalization movement that used to call itself the Occupy Wall Street. Of course, all these are insufficient, all these we can criticize, but they represent different perspectives within our societies of people from below who are trying to organize to make their voices heard. These voices are not perfect, we are not perfect, but I think we can build a common ground of fight and combat together. We don't need to be d'accord, to be in agreement in all the means we want to use, even not on the definite end where we want to go, but there are intermediate ends and means on which we can work together. The parasol. Well, what can be said? It's 15 years ago. It was a very, very comment dit-on? Dramatic. C'était malheureux. Unfortunate. Malheureux is worse than unfortunate. Statement. I'm truly convinced that Mr. Parisot didn't want to pinpoint dominated minorities. He expressed himself very bad. In fact, he just needed to talk about money, because that's money who made the referendum lost from his perspective. But money found its way through some very organized and specific communities. Two of them who are their leaders, not the people, but their leaders who are in a type of clientelist. Is it client to clientist relationship with the federal government and the local federalists, which gives a lot of benefit to the leaders of these communities and act in the name of and push in their communities for these political maneuvers. And but today there is a very interesting impact on those sayings, because those sayings, first of all, give a really electric shock within the sovereignist movement itself, which brought the Bloc Québécois, and we are indebted to a very interesting philosopher in the University of Montreal, maybe some of whom you know, Michel Seymour. He has worked on questions of identities a lot, who was in the Bloc Québécois and developed a concept which now prevails in the sovereignist movement of abandoning the ethnic definition of Quebecers and of Quebec identity to provide another way of defining its relationship for immigrants like me to Quebec, which is based on rights, which is based on common values, which is based on social and civic values, which we call now, if you wish, civic nationalism. And it's really dominant. It's so dominant that a lot of conservative nationalists are, in the last years, given a lot of effort to say, no, we have to fight for our heritage, for our culture. We don't have to be shy that we're Christians, we're Catholics, so on and so forth. And in fact, if I am now involved in some ways, in modest way, in the politics of Quebec, it's because of that reflection in Bloc Québécois. They went in the 2000 election after people in the communities that were open to this idea and offered them to join in. And that's why in 2000 I presented myself for Bloc Québécois, and which brought later the people with whom I was working since '97 in building an alternative for the Parti Québécois left-wing alternative to count on my, if you wish, little notoriety to build up, you know, some support. So, in fact, it has had some sidekicks, you say, that are positive for the left. Side benefits. Sidekick is not good. It's bad. Okay. It's different word. Side effects. Side benefits. An easy answer is that we can be socialist or social democrat without being, of course, social democrat is short, without being Leninist. I don't define myself through those references, and I don't think Quebec Solidaire could define itself because we have many people, some of them are from those historical currents, which with the same criticism about actual states, actual powers, actual formal democracies. To be concise, as I said, of course, actual states, as Canada, as Quebec, as many countries, are in fact complicit because they are deprived or they have self-deprived themselves from power. They don't exert as it must be the sovereignty of their people. For me, sovereignty is, in that term, is the sovereign people. If you wish, more historically, the Soviet of people. Their capacity to have a place of debate, to decide for their future. So of course, all these states that you named are complicit of that global institution of global capitalism, which exerts its power through standards, Poor's, Moody's, the multinational institutions, to enforce their authority over the sovereignty of people, which in those states are not realized. For us, the sovereignty of Quebec or the sovereignty of any other country is only real when it will be popular power. Now, does popular power has to get rid of national assemblies, of parliaments, of democracies? Are there historical fatality that we cannot obtain real sovereignty of people with democracy? That is something that is open to discussion within Quebec Solidaire. Nobody can pretend that we have a definitive answer. The only answer that I can give that we want to form a political alternative as large as possible of all the political currents that think that this organization of state and economy has to be abandoned, has to change. Now, to what form is open to debate. Do you understand, size me? Because we don't have an answer. Maybe you have, but I don't have that answer. As a spokesperson, I'm not allowed to give an answer because we don't have a common ground. But even as a person, I'm saying, abandoning my chapeau de Québec Solidaire, I don't have that answer. I don't know. I really don't know. I'm just not sure. I don't know, I have, I'm not, je ne suis pas un spécialiste, I'm not a specialist and I don't know enough of the subtleties of the mutual interaction between different components of the left in Latin America. But it seems to be so varied and deep-rooted in a long battle of popular movements. The examples that I know, Brazil or Ecuador a little bit more than Venezuela, is supporting in my mind the idea that even if in short term the actual left-wing powers lose electorally to their counterparts, the social gains and the changes in the power structure that are pushing will prevail in large extent. I don't see, unless there is huge intervention from outside or huge Yeah, because I don't think even the right wings in Latin America now have the capacity by their own to organize systematic repression of the popular movements. So I think these gains, in big part, sont durables, durable and not dependent on some leadership. Of course, the loss of important leaders, even if we're not agreeing on all levels with their decisions or their style or anywhere, these are big losses for people, there are big losses for the movement, but they're not, ils sont pas déterminants, they're not determinant in my opinion. I hope I'm right.
Very good.
In our party, there are the groupes d'affinité, we call them the collectif. We have some collectives within Quebec Solidaire. We have a collective, for example, which is thinking and trying to promote décroissance. Décroissance, huh? Degrowth. We have also a strong collective along the ideas and reflections of people who define themselves as eco-socialists. But unfortunately, I was, as a doctor now, has become a specialist of mining sector in Quebec. The problem is we have so much problem that since I'm in charge of that file, so I haven't been in touch very much with. But it's really very. What I know, it's really very. It has a lot of vitality. We just have no time now to see what is happening. It's pushing up from all sides. Thanks to in big part to the nascent young movement within the student movement. All these networks and all these places where there is more organization have seen their ranks grown because of those movements. I think there is a big demonstration to do that the electoral mode has any capacity to change in a meaningful way the plight of people. I'm agreeing with you. But I'm saying that there is no tentative from our part to hegemonically decide that everybody in the left should think like that we have to go through an electoral way. And actually, I think there is something very good in the fact that a lot of people just don't accept this path and want to fight it in a more meaningful, radical basis. I don't see in that any problem for Quebec Solidaire, but I think there is a capacity for us to see, exactly the way, for example, AC, which dominantly was, if you wish, influenced by the anarchists, but tried to find a way to have an intermediate level agreement on the first step on which they can fight together. And it had some important gains. That the whole period that you're thinking about that enabled people, popular movement, to join in and create the conditions of that taking conscience and becoming more politicized was rendered possible through that. So I think there is a fruitful thinking that we should do about that. We don't need to deny the legitimacy or the plausibility of the hypothesis we're trying to demonstrate. Maybe it will work, maybe I'm not stating it's the only way, and we think that's the only way the progressives should fight and struggle and organize in Quebec. No. So, about ecology, we define ourselves as ecologists. We have translated it in our platform in putting forward the fact that we need to re-question the dynamics behind the disruption of nature, and we have then to question the mode of massive production of products by the actual industrial and post-industrial society. So we are questioning the growth. That's why we have eco-socialists, we have a group working on ideas about degrowth. Now, very practically, that means, of course, that not only are we against the reversal of the pipeline, and our people, in fact, members of are in the citizens group organizing around those issues in different parts of, they have important roles in those groups, fighting against the reversal. Unfortunately, we lost one ally when the minister in the PQ government was the closest to our point on that was put away, Daniel Breton. And we are only against, even because the mastery of resources is very important in the symbolism of Quebec nationalist movement around the issue of, so the question for common, the mainstream thinking is that the problem is not with exploiting the resource, but who is proprietary. Is it public or private? Is it outside Quebec or Quebec people? So we're trying to say no. Even if we are completely in control and have socialized, for example, the exploitation of fossil fuel, we have to stop its extraction, even if it could have huge revenues. For example, it's estimated that there is 1 billion barrel or 10 billion barrel. The numbers are so big, I have forgotten. I think 1 billion barrel of oil, not shale, you know, conventional oil just beneath Anticosti. Okay? So it is a wet dream for PQ, for example, because they say, oh great, that is a lot of money coming in and it's a big source of revenue for the government. But of course we are trying at our best to promote the idea, no, because it's losing our time, it's losing, we use their own, it's a loss of opportunity, because the time we're developing that sector, we don't invest in renewable energy, in other forms, in reducing consumption, and so on and so forth. So we're fighting on those grounds. Excuse me, I just, yeah, the contribution, thank you. You can, but we can also talk more. You can come more often in our, we can invite you in our, we have a congress in 2nd, 3rd, and 4th of May. Is that right? 2, 3, 2nd, you can come and I invite you. If we can offer you militant accommodation, please join you in a van or come with, you know, it's a month of May, come by. Our structure is that we are built as a coalition, in the sense that it's in the same manner that in community and union groups usually will build up coalitions, but the party is organized on an electoral mode, in the sense that delegates are defined based on their appartenance to a riding. So delegates are not defined as based on their link to, for example, a collective, a socialist collective, or the only exception being that we have some specific instances. One is about equality issues, women equality. Donc on a le Comité National des Femmes.
National Women's Committee.
Yeah, the National Women's Committee, which can send delegates. And we have the Political Commission, which also can send delegates to Congress. Other than that, the basis of decision is based on membership in riding associations, and also some delegates from regional associations who send delegates to the Congress. So there is no seats, for example, for unions, for community groups, ecologist groups, or whatsoever. the membership basis within a party is an individual basis. But once inside, they can organize around collectives to create dynamics of just collaboration, to think and produce thought, ideas, influence the party in the debates without having a formal control over its delegation or its structures of representation. We have a 14-member comité de coordination committee at the national level, and two spokesperson. When I went in 2008, I was the male spokesperson, and Françoise was the female spokesperson, Françoise David, who comes from the feminist movement and social movement. But when I went to the parliament, in order in the long term to prevent that the party becomes only a tool for, carriéristes, des politiciens de carrière, career politician, to maintain a strong basis of control of the party outside the parliament, we changed the structure so that from now on, from 2009, we have, our party has to choose every time one spokesperson, one of the two spokespersons has to be outside the parliament. So now that Françoise has come in, one of us abandoned its role, it's me. So Françoise is the female spokesperson. We have an interim spokesperson now who is a previous union leader, André Frappier, who used to work with the Canadian Labour, he was in relation with the Canadian Labour Congress. And we'll choose one in the next Congress. So in the long term, that's the way we have tried. It's the best of our knowledge. We will improve in the future, I hope, to maintain a strong, non-parliamentary party basis of organization. So I think it comes to the question I left out, Paul Rose, because they have to close. I will be available for your question. I think it was asked from many of your colleagues. So let me answer about Paul Rose. Paul Rose took up arms against what he thought to be colonial rule in the 60s. Paul Rose comes from a very poor family, and a bunch of young people in the late 60s took up arms against the government. This has happened in many countries around the world. Some places it has brought those who have took up arms into power. Remember, I don't want to, je ne veux pas compare, say Paul Rose is Nelson Mandela, although in his character, in his, really, I will send you, if you wish, a testimony I received from Dave Fenario. Dave Fenario is a playwright, long-time leftist, Montreal leftist, who wrote to me just a few days ago. A very, very honorable, a very, very kind, and a great man, okay? Paul Rose, if that movement had gained power, today would be how do you say it, a hero. We would have probably statues all over Quebec or streets in his name. Paul Rose himself criticized the way they thought they could change the situation in Quebec. Paul Rose admitted himself in a book that he has written himself, a text that he has written himself, that they were wrong in thinking that by taking arms at that time they could achieve the goals that they had to liberate the Quebec people and workers. They were talking in those terms, okay, liberation of workers and people. And even if Paul Rose, by all those who have commented knowledgeably the events of October, was probably even not there when Pierre Laporte died, he took on himself, because as it is said, the person who committed the accident, who brought the loss of life of Pierre Laporte, was not how do you say it, strong enough psychologically, and had not a long experience of involvement with the FLQ. So Paul Rose didn't want somebody who just had joined in and had much less responsibility than himself, who was a founder of FLQ, to accept this responsibility. And for that exception, for that recognition of the assassination, he paid 12 years of his life in prison.
The Globe and Mail gave the same version this week.
I'm sorry?
The Globe and Mail said a similar thing this week, actually.
Yeah. And then, when he came out, he became a true Democrat, whatever that means, and worked as a union organizer, and played a relatively, I would say, not important but notable role in the formation of the Parti de la Démocratie Socialiste, PDS, which is the NDP when it decided to cut off from the NDP Canada in the late 80s, okay? Beginning of 90s. Yeah. It became PDS, and PDS worked very hard to form an alternative, which was called Rassemblement pour une alternative politique, which then became Union des Forces Progressistes and Québec Solidaire. So he acted in a very sincere way in increasing the platform of unity within the political left in Quebec. So when I declared that we're going to try to pay some tribute to him, it was not to pay a tribute to his assassination of Pierre Laporte, an event, which wasn't, but he recognized to be his, okay? He has decided that he bears responsibility of that accident, which was not an assassination, but was condemned for us formally. Even formally, he paid the due to this formal society of 12 years in prison. And he has been on the basis of the testimony of everybody who has worked or seen him in action, very honorable and very strong and very cherished. Quelqu'un de vraiment, vraiment honorable dans le sens vrai du terme, le vrai honneur d'un citoyen engagé. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you everybody for coming out for the wonderful questions, and see you in 1 year.